Hello, I'm Connor Parfit, and today I'm going to be doing my presentation on the mistreatment of Black trans women in America. This topic is very important to me because as a gay man, Black trans women fought for my equal rights back in the late 60s and early 70s, and still are fighting vigorously today. I would like to pay a great tribute to my presentation to Marsha P. Johnson, as she was a Black trans woman who led the Stonewall riots against police brutality in the LGBTQIA plus community. And although Black trans women were the driving force for LGBT rights, they are still the worst affected in society. In my presentation, I'm going to be starting off with the stats of the mistreatment of Black trans women, and then I will go on to the possible reasons for these statistics and what can be done moving forward. Firstly, I'd like to delve into the graph that is on the first slide. The three key stats that I would like to point out are the ones that are highlighted. Firstly, the row that says officers assumed they were sex workers is 21% for Black trans people and only 8% for white trans people. The sexualization and fetishization of Black trans women is really seen here, and it's important to note how those issues can seriously affect the interaction between the police and Black transgender women. Continuing on down a row, 12% of Black trans women were physically attacked by officers, and only 2% of white trans people. This may be linked back to the idea that the media perpetuates the image of Black muggers that Hall talks about in his book. And that on top of the possible transphobia and racism and sexism that the police officer may have can lead to a lot more violent situation than if a police officer was dealing with a white counterpart. Finally, I like to highlight the sexual assault by officers, which is 6% for Black transgender women and 2% for white people. Once again, drawing on the concept that Black trans women are fetishized in society. Although this graph is a very slim outline of the issues that Black trans women and Black trans people have to face on a daily basis with the police, it is a good insight to the issues that white people don't have to endure on such a extreme level. Furthermore, some more statistics that I think need to be highlighted and pointed out. 75% of LGBT hate crimes are against trans women, most of them trans women of color. In today's society, being a white gay man is not as difficult as it used to be, with the media constantly growing the public perception of homosexuality and leading to wider acceptance within the community. The media are yet to pick up on Black trans women and trans people in general. So the general public have not been introduced to the normality of these people, and so views and mindsets are lagging years behind that of homosexual white men and women. When a transgender person is incarcerated, they are more likely to be put into prison of the sex they were assigned at birth. This is extremely dangerous, and as seen, they are 13 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than anyone else in prison. The mistreatment by the state when placing transgender people in prisons has led to this disturbing figure that should not be a reality, but is sadly for many. Moving to the final row, I'd like to discuss 7% of transgender men have reported experiencing a physical attack compared to 14 of Black transgender women, double the amount. I would like to highlight that all transgender people are experiencing transphobia. However, Black transgender women are experiencing sexism and racism on top of that. Of course, it is deterministic to assume that all of these attacks are hate crime based, and some just might be general violence. However, it is a good base of understanding how Black transgender women experience greater complications when dealing with the police. Black trans women are 3.7 times more likely to experience police violence than anyone else, which is worrying, as they are one of the smallest minority groups. Yet this figure says they are targeted more than anyone else. This slide shows a slow change in transgender history concerning sexual orientation and gender identity and employment discrimination. In my opinion, employment discrimination is a good starting point to the conversation, as in a capitalist society, if someone is discriminated against so much they are unable to get a job, they are more likely to fall into hardships and economic and cultural deprivation. This may lead to people committing crimes and therefore more interactions with the police, meaning a greater chance of people getting hurt and discriminated against. As seen by the graph, before the 1990s, there was quite a slow progression of wider change in America legally. It wasn't until the millennium that legal rights started to be introduced for gay and trans people. However, this doesn't mean that discrimination and bias from employers was removed. Following on from that, I would now like to discuss the current climate of living standards for Black transgender people. This graph shows that 34% of trans people in America are extremely poor, and 41% of Black transgender women have experienced homelessness. These numbers are extremely high for a group who aren't the majority and can be evidence of the workplace discriminatory actions I have mentioned in the previous slide. Because of this hardship and poverty that some Black transgender women are forced into, often the only option is to turn to illegal paid work, such as sex work. This kind of work is extremely dangerous and volatile, especially for transgender women. However, they have no other choice and can sometimes end up with them getting seriously hurt or even killed. I would like to draw up on something called the trans panic defense, which is a legal reasoning for hurting transgender people when the defendant is emotionally shocked when the victim is trans. Not only does this put transgender people at risk of not getting justice, it also shows institutional transphobia that is still upheld today. I would now like to turn my attention to the people that have been affected by police violence and neglection. Layleen Polanco was a 27-year-old Black trans woman who was originally arrested for sex work that she carried out in order to survive. A lot of people do not choose to do this work, as previously mentioned, but they are forced into it by circumstance, as the government and state do not offer any other support alternative to get these people on their feet. Although Polanco was not imprisoned for their sex work, she was put in prison for missing court dates that were part of a alternative to incarceration program. However, when she missed an appointment, she was put into prison, where she was placed in solitary confinement in a men's prison. It needs to be questioned why the state do not place trans women in a women's prison, especially if in a men's prison they are put away for their safety. The police wardens failed to carry out 15-minute health checks, which led to Polanco having a seizure in her cell and unfortunately passing away from this. This was Polanco's third seizure in police custody, yet the police officers involved were excused by the Bronx District Attorney Office for any wrongdoing or mistreatment and were allowed to return to work 2 weeks later. The mistreatment of Black trans women was completely disregarded, and Layleen has not received justice. I would also like to discuss some more Black transgender women who have been killed due to neglect by American police officers. Firstly, Roxanne Moore was shot 16 times by police officers after she was carrying a gun that was inoperable due to a fitted safety mechanism. She had mental health problems, and the police did not conduct the correct code of conduct in the situation. Moore was not killed at the incident, however, police officers involved returned to the workforce a few days later. Moore received no justice for what happened, and she's been disregarded by the state, possibly as an act of passive transphobia. CC McDonald was incarcerated after performing self-defense from a transphobic and racist attack. Although self-defense is a valid form of violence, this case was not ruled as such, and it's a stark contrast to the people who use the trans panic defense. The court ruling could have been perceived as institutionally or systematically racist and transphobic, or it was down to the independent bias of the decision makers in that scenario. However, she has been treated with the double standards throughout the case. Next, Joanna Johnson was brutally murdered by a white police officer. And now I would like to draw on how the institution as a whole needs to educate the police officers and remove any bias or residing hate towards any kind of individual, as police officers are meant to be there to serve and protect everyone as equals. And without the right education, people were stuck in the mindset that they have had for many years prior. Niza Morris, this case is quite concerning, as to the naked eye, she appears to have been killed by police officers, as moments before she was seen dead, she was taken into police custody, yet she was found dead on the street. No one has been prosecuted, and Morris was determined not a victim of any crime. The case has been closed and there are no further investigations. The case of Kayla Moore once again shows the extreme mistreatment and lack of training by police officers. A friend called the police as Moore was experiencing a manic episode. The police then restrained her for 5 to 10 minutes until she stopped responding, later pronouncing her dead. The violence the police exhibit towards Black transgender women is no coincidence, and their lives are being seen as less than by people who are meant to protect them. During the early days of the pandemic, there was a short period where a few Black transgender women were killed consecutively, all by the hands of the police. And thanks to social media, these women's names were spread across the world so justice could be brought for them. Mass protests broke out across the globe that change needed to happen. And in conjunction with the murder of George Floyd, people had had enough of being treated with less than attitudes. But have these protests led to any major change within the legality of the state? The Biden-Harris administration introduced the Interagency Working Group, which is the collective of individuals from departments that span across the entirety of the government that take formal complaints in a way that allows feedback from the population, leading to improvements and development in the institution. Furthermore, police officers now undergo more training and education on equality and how to deal with people that need help rather than using violence. Lastly, with the Black Trans Lives Matter movement being intersectional within the Black Lives Matter protests, the general public are now receiving more information on Black trans women and the difficulties faced. Growing the public perception is vital to changing the transphobic, sexist, and racist notions within the police, and it has to start from the people. Thank you so much for listening.